Hey guys, Ron here. Hope everyone's well. I'm back at the harbor. I don't think I've been here in a few weeks. I don't know. I've been busy and then I just ran out of material. And I did a couple of daytime videos, but I haven't been able to do any more since. So tonight, I'm here at the harbor. Oh, I see it's another bad hair day. Well, what a shock. Anyway, but we're not going to be looking at me much, thank God. We're going to be hearing about this case. Tonight, I'm discussing the case of George Smith. Now, this case is from 2005, so it's an older case, but I've been fascinated since I heard about it a couple of years ago, and it's been documented in the media. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. I just think it's a fascinating case, and I want to recap it and probably talk about some of my theories. And I'm always fascinated to hear your theories because many of you who are regular commenters have some just really brilliant insights on this, especially when it comes to true crime or celebrity history, dark history, or otherwise, especially here in Southern California. But this one isn't a Southern California thing, although a lot of the players are, some of the players are from Southern California. But this case really fascinates me, and there's still no determination. I hate cold cases. But we're going to talk about the disappearance, presumed death of George Smith, who died in 2005 off a Royal Caribbean cruise liner and presumably went overboard. And was it murder or was it accidental? I have my theories. So we'll talk. So George Smith was George Smith was a guy who had it all. I mean, he looked like, I don't know for sure that he was in a fraternity, but I'm sure he was. And I'm sure, is there a president of a fraternity? Is there like a head guy in the fraternity? If there was, I'm sure he was it. He was 6'2", 210, handsome guy, and he had just married Jennifer Hagel, blonde, blue-eyed, I think she's blue-eyed, beautiful girl. And so they were the quintessential beautiful couple. George's family, in fact, I think was George Smith IV. His father was an entrepreneur, owned a business. George was going to inherit the business. Their wedding was no doubt paid for probably by I assume by the father, or maybe the family's one half, but in Newport, Rhode Island. Yeah, it must have been, because it was on the property owned by the Smiths. And so a lot of money on George's side of the family. George had a sister and was purportedly close with his parents. He was 26 years old. He had just married Jen Hagel, who was 25. And Jennifer Hagel was going to be a third grade school teacher. So they went on their honeymoon. I believe the ship was Brilliance of the Seas, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not going to look back in any notes. And it seemed that things started going wrong right away. And what was the main culprit? Gee, what a shock, folks. Want to help me out? Alcohol. Yes. So they go on their honeymoon, and George, being the outgoing guy he was, or maybe it was Jen as well, or maybe it was both of them, they started meeting people. They left from Barcelona. I actually went on a cruise and left from Barcelona once too, and then you cruise into the Mediterranean, and then they were going to Greece. They did go to Greece, had a great time in Greece, and they were going to be in Turkey and up the coast and in Italy. They were meeting people on the cruise, and at the ports and on the ship. So at one point, George meets a guy named Josh Askin, and that was the downfall. I mean, I believe he'd be alive if he had not met Josh Askin today. So he meets Josh Askin, who's 20 years old, with his family. Everybody else was with their family except Jennifer and George, who, like I said, had just been married and were on their own, and they were about 5 years older than the other players in this tragic story. So Purportedly, George and Jen were having a good time partying, having a fun time, exploring Greece, and especially Mykonos Island that they were on. And in fact, at one point, George emailed his family and he said, "Having a great time. Don't contact me unless someone has died, or it's the end of the world." And boy, was that prophetic. So they're having a great time, purportedly. Sorry, I may have to pause from time to time because basically I've been sneezing for weeks. It's just this cold air, and I know I keep complaining, and those of you most of you are not in Southern California are probably like, "Oh my God, would this guy quit bitching about cold? 57 degrees is cold." Well, no. To most of the world, it's not cold, but to me it is, and it's when you're right on the water, it's very damp, and we've also had warm days and wind blowing, and anyway, so I've been a sneezy guy for a while. Anyway, so at some point they meet George and Jen meet Josh Askin. Josh Askin was with his family on the cruise. And Josh Askin is a partying guy as well as George. They like to drink. In fact, at some point, George helps Josh smuggle absinthe on the cruise. And as you know, or you may not know, it's basically illegal to be sold in a lot of places. It's such powerful alcohol that it can cause hallucinations, apparently. So I don't know. I'm not going to say why would anybody want to mess with it, because who am I to judge, right? Everybody has their own likes and dislikes. So they are drinking, they're partying, and I believe it was actually the night of July 4th, although of course they're in the middle of the Mediterranean. Jen and George have dinner at, I believe the restaurant was called the Chop House aboard the ship. And then George goes back to the room. He brings his dinner jacket back to the room, and they go up, and he and Jen go up to the casino. And at the casino, he meets up with his new friend, Josh Askin. In fact, there's video of them meeting and walking around the casino. And purportedly, George is teaching craps to young Josh. And I believe Josh was about 20, about 5-6 years younger. Anyway, so at some point in the evening, apparently Jennifer is noticed by the casino. I've heard he was manager or assistant manager and or croupier. And I don't know what his exact title was, because like I said, there are different things that you hear. But apparently this guy Lloyd was hanging on Jennifer just a bit too much. More conflicting stories than some say that Lloyd followed. Oh, excuse me, I must back up. At the casino, Josh Askin, new friend of George Smith, introduces George to some guys that he's been hanging out with. And throughout this case, and to this day, and for over 15 years, they've been referred to just as the Russians. This is cousins Zach and Greg Rosenberg, and their other friend Rusty. Rusty was not his real name. He had a long Russian name that I don't believe I can pronounce easily, so I'll stick with Rusty. So the Russians, these three guys, are partying with George and with Josh Askin and with Jen. Now, purportedly, there are at least 3 witnesses from the casino who say that George was bragging about having anywhere from, now the number varies, but they're saying that George was bragging about having anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 in his cabin in wedding gifts, and that the witnesses said even then, that night and to this day, they were concerned that, they thought a person shouldn't be speaking like that out loud, and I tend to agree with that, although, you don't, it's too bad that's the world we live in. But like I say, at least 3 separate witnesses said that he was bragging about the money he had. And in fact, apparently he went up to his room at one point, I believe with Josh, to get even more money to gamble with. Now, they're pretty fried, they're pretty inebriated by this time, and at some point, apparently, like I said, Lloyd, the croupier or the assistant manager of the casino, comes into the picture, and he's hanging with them, and there are varying stories as to what happened. Some say that Lloyd left with them to keep partying as they went to the bar, or to the disco, I should say, which had a bar in it, obviously. And the Lloyd's girlfriend says that no, he wasn't. For one thing, the crew is not supposed to fraternize with the. Despite what happened on the Love Boat, the crew is not supposed to fraternize with the guests, the customers. I don't know, what would we call them? People on the cruise line, the passengers. But apparently it happens all the time. So there are varying accounts. Some say that everybody was pretty wasted, and that Jennifer was getting more and more pissed off at George. George was getting more and more jealous because she was hanging around with Lloyd, the assistant manager of the casino. And some say that Lloyd went up the elevator along with Jennifer and George and at least one of the Rosenberg cousins, and that the cousin kind of looked at the other guy and like, wow, he's got his arm around her, he's flirting with her blatantly, this is not right. And that apparently that when they got to the disco, George finally had some kind of an argument which nobody heard on the dance floor, presumably because he was jealous of Lloyd hanging around his new bride, and Jennifer promptly kicked George in the groin and took off either by herself or with Lloyd. There are varying accounts on that too. Now, Lloyd's girl, I do believe that part of it happened. Now, what happened from that point is in dispute, because Lloyd's girlfriend, now I didn't know you were allowed to have a significant other or anyone else while you're working in your cabin as your, the guy's the manager, but I guess apparently his girlfriend was on the cruise with him in the cabin. So you guys who know better than I can tell me. But his girlfriend gave him an alibi and saying, the disco closed at 2:30, the lights came on. Of course, I believe she said he didn't show up till 3:15. That gives them 45 minutes. But in other words, the speculation that that Lloyd, the manager of the casino, took inebriated Jennifer back to her room to be naughty with her, apparently, according to the girlfriend, that didn't happen, because she said he came back to me after work like he always does. I still think he did go up to the disco with them, and I think something happened. But unless they messed around in a hallway or in some hidden area, which is possible, all this is speculation, guys, but I'm only going by a friend of mine who's taken many, many cruises in his life, and he's pretty cynical, and he doesn't think people are all that innocent. So I'm only going by his sort of biased opinion, telling me that there's a lot of hidden areas that an employee could bring a passenger and mess around with them if they wanted to. But again, pure speculation. So what does happen is that Jennifer leaves around 2:30 in the morning. And really, I don't even know. Nobody seems to know her whereabouts after that, other than she is found in a hallway. Now, a crew member says they got on the elevator with her, says she was alone, wasn't with Lloyd, unless he's covering for Lloyd, says that she got off the elevator and went the opposite direction of her stateroom after this crew member asked if she needed any help, to which she said no. And apparently she passed out in the hallway and wasn't found till 4:30 in the morning, where crew members found her and brought her back in her inebriated state in a wheelchair back to her cabin right around 5 a.m. 5 a.m., she's back at the cabin, obviously, because I just said that. And she never makes a complaint that the room is in disarray, but she does notice George isn't there. But she makes some odd statements later on, saying that George and she had spent nights already in separate cabins on the cruise. Isn't that weird? her husband and possibly she were spending nights apart in other cabins. Some speculate they had an open relationship. She hasn't spoken to that, but the whole thing is weird. On their honeymoon, they're spending at least one night apart, and she didn't worry about him. Comes back at 5 a.m. Like I said, she thought, according to her, she thought he was out still partying with the guys or asleep somewhere else. I guess like she had passed out in the hallway and claimed she didn't remember anything afterwards. Now, 3 hours later, Jen's already up and at a spa appointment she had for, at 8:30, she had a spa appointment. So she's already up and awake and, and reportedly doesn't know anything about the whereabouts of her brand new husband. So, here's where it gets murky. The guys, the Russians, say that, and here's where I'm very cynical to this. They said that because they were such good guys, by the way, this is important. I say this and I want to say it before I forget it. Am I casting aspersions on the character of the Russians and Josh Askin? Maybe. Because days later, they were accused of raping a passenger or assaulting a passenger, and it was on videotape. They were summarily kicked off the ship, all four of those guys, I believe, and their families. Then I guess they scrutinized the video, and I guess either it was determined that the incident was consensual with this female passenger, or they just didn't have enough evidence to prosecute because nothing came of it. And I also believe that I was told that room service refused to deliver to them because they had such bad attitudes with room service. The reason I'm saying all this is that these guys clearly are not choir boys. But they claim that basically out of the goodness of their heart, this is why I'm telling you this, that they helped poor Georgie back to his room after the argument with his new wife. They held him, one guy held him on one side, another guy held him on the other side, and they helped him back to his room and possibly took off his shoes and put him to bed. Now, I hate to be cynical here, guys, but I mean, and I can't speak for all men, but young punk guys, 20 years old, or of any age, I can't picture guys. Women I can, because they're a lot nicer and kinder to their female friends and to their friends and a lot of times people in general. I can't picture young punk, let's bring this guy back to bed, and let's take off his shoes, gross, and let's put him to bed and even tuck him in. I mean, seriously, this is what these guys said. And for you guys listening, for you men listening, can you picture and being drunk off your ass? I mean, someone said, it has been said that they were so intoxicated that it made, especially at the disco, after dinner and after the casino, up till 2:30 in the morning, said that they were so drunk and doing so many absinthe shots that it made a frat party look like, a church service or something. This was like a hellacious party. Whether drugs were involved as well, we don't know. But these guys were completely wasted. George was stumbly wasted. Jen was stumbly wasted. But the guys claim they brought him back to bed innocently to just, I guess, be new friends that they had just met 2 hours earlier and see him back to his room. And I don't believe it. I don't believe it. But again, I'm cynical. Now, they claim that they, like I said, they took him back to the room. They put him to bed. Obviously, Jen wasn't there. So when they first got back to the room, they said that he really wanted to go down to a place called the Solarium and take a look for her. Now, there is some evidence this did happen, that they took him, they did one sweep, found that she wasn't there, and they came back and brought him up to his room. Again, they have key cards that show, the entrance to the rooms. So, at this point is where it gets murky. Now, there were people staying, obviously, on either side of George and Jen in their cabin. Luckily for everyone, now there's conflicting stories from the people on one side and the person on the other side. But one of the main witnesses was, of all things, on the other side of the room, assistant chief of police for Redlands, California, which is a town between Los Angeles and Palm Springs. And it's no small, it's got to be a couple 100,000 people. And this guy was the chief of police, or the deputy chief of police. Okay, and he says that he heard a lot of noise in the cabin, and that he heard strange things like a voice saying, "Calm down, George, cool it, calm down," and then a lone male voice saying, "Good night, good night, good night." Very odd stuff. Then he said a loud commotion, and he said he then looked outside the cabin after he heard the good nights, and he saw three guys. This is crucial. He said he saw three young guys leave the room, absolutely not a fourth. So presumably, if we believe the deputy chief of police, the witness, the ear witness from next door, the next cabin, one guy was left in the cabin with George. Then he says he heard sounds like furniture moving around, then silence, and then what he describes as a terrible thud. Well, we know now the thud was George falling from his cabin, from his balcony, and hitting the canopy that was on top of the life rafts. We know that because at about 8:30, 8 or 8:30 the next morning, a 15-year-old passenger noticed all the blood, or what she found out later was blood, on the top of the canopy, and took photos of it. In fact, passengers, including this young lady, had spotted the blood before the crew even spotted the blood. When they spotted the blood, they also went back into the cabin and found, at some point, we'll never know how many times they went in the cabin, and they found blood in the cabin, George's and Jen's cabin. So at 10 o'clock, Jennifer is informed that her husband is presumed dead, gone overboard. There's blood on the canopy. And then the questioning starts. However, it's my understanding that the questioning of the Rosenbergs, the Russians, and of Josh Askin, and of Lloyd, the employee, didn't happen until they were off the ship. This whole thing seems horribly botched. In fact, the CEO of Royal Caribbean actually went on to the Larry King show to defend the company. I'd imagine, to me, I would say, now, at the time the captain said he thought it was accidental. Like somehow George, being 6'2", had climbed on top of the 4-foot tall balcony railing and somehow, I don't know, smoking a cigar or something, had fallen overboard. Doesn't account for the blood on the canopy, and it does not account for the blood in the room, because the belief was there was too much blood just for him to be hitting the canopy. The belief was that the blood was pre-existing, shall we say, that he was already bleeding when he hit that canopy. So remember, I told you earlier that the Russians were summarily, a couple days later, kicked off the ship for presumably sexually assaulting a woman, but it never came to anything, and videotaping it. Now there's another videotape that people made, and this came out I think years later, where the guys are overheard not only mocking George's death, this is while they're still on the cruise, but apparently saying, "We gave that guy a hang gliding accident without a hang glide," or something like that. All sounds very fishy to me. Doesn't it sound fishy to you? Here's another interesting part of the case. They all ended up basically taking the fifth. Some of them took lie detector tests, polygraphs, some passed, some did not. No one was ever charged with the case, in the case. Years later, Greg Rosenberg was in jail, and he gives a deposition to the Smith's lawyer. Jennifer Smith, the new bride, I mean, she had only been Smith for 11 days, Jennifer Hagel, she received over $1 million settlement from Royal Caribbean. I believe that the parents of George Smith challenged that and reduced her award. And they got some money too, but, you know, not enough to bring back their son. Anyway, so they were all questioned, including Jennifer Hagel. And of course, she eventually went on to be married and is a mother now. And she thinks it was an accident. The boat captain thinks it was an accident. I don't know what their evidence is. The CEO of Royal Caribbean said some odd things. He said that he wished the captain hadn't have come out and speculated about being an accident, but he didn't say we strongly believe it's murder. I personally think if I owned a cruise line, I wouldn't want to admit that sometimes, unfortunately, you have murders on cruise ships, and there are a whole series documenting killings that take place on cruise ships. So I guess maybe it's considered worse publicity to admit that there was a murder or speculate that there was a murder versus a tragic accident. Now, like I say, the Russians and Josh Askin, they were questioned. They said they ordered a huge amount of room service, and it came right around 5 a.m. That's right, very close to the time, within maybe a half hour of the time that George would have gone off the railing. However, apparently there's no record of food being delivered to their room or that an order being placed. Maybe a phone call, but no food. So the lawyer to some of the Russians says that they think the ship is lying. Now, why would the people, here's my question to you, why would the people who work in the kitchen, supplying room service to passengers, why would they alter documents and lie and say, no, these guys never ordered from us? I mean, why would they have a dog in that fight to implicate these guys and potentially blow their so-called alibi? See how mysterious it is? Exactly why I wanted to do this. Now, the other part of it is that, as I started to say earlier, before I sidetrack myself, which I usually do, years later, I think it was 2012, 2013, I think. Greg Rosenberg is in prison, and he's doing a few years for drug trafficking, oxy. And he at the time is saying, they're asking him about Josh Askin. Josh Askin was saying at the time, I don't think Jennifer had anything to do with it. I don't, but you got to question Lloyd. Lloyd, the manager from the casino, he was hanging on her. He was hitting on her. Where did they go afterwards? He was trying to implicate Lloyd. So they ask, in this deposition video, they ask Greg Rosenberg about his accusation, and he's just saying various things. I don't know, man, none of my business. I don't know. And I'm not no killer. Drugs one thing, but I don't kill nobody. Anyway, he's going on and on. So we'll flash forward years later, I believe 2019, and that same Greg Rosenberg is shot to death in his driveway, sitting in his car, while his family is inside the house. Now, was this drug related, or was this to silence him about the George Smith murders, which took place, 15 years earlier? Hard to say, but it's pretty strange. So anyway, it's an unsolved case. I think personally that George was murdered. Here's what I think. I think that George, in his inebriated state, made it very well known he had a ton of money in his cabin. He was wearing an expensive watch. It's true. It's funny too. It's interesting because Rosenberg, in his deposition, says the reason I'm in prison now, and I'm paraphrasing, is because basically was saying the reason he dealt drugs was to get money for his lifestyle of liking things, a la watches, clothes, things like that. Anyway, so my theory is that George was bragging money he had in the cabin, whether it was $15,000, whether it was $50,000 in those wedding gifts. I think that, like I said, I don't see any reason three separate witnesses would either lie or be mistaken about this. So I believe them. I don't think that the guys brought him back to his cabin out of the goodness of their heart to remove his shoes and tuck him in like good boys. Weird shit, okay? I don't think that happened. I think that somebody went back to rob George. I think that's very possible. I also believe the witness next door, the ear witness, the deputy chief of police that was next door, in saying that he looked out the cabin and saw 3 guys leaving, not 4. Now the lawyers say, well, maybe there was a 4th guy obscured or at the front of the 3rd guy or around a corner. I mean, come on. I don't buy it. Maybe, but he says he only saw 3. I think a guy remained or went back in the room. And that whole thing about furniture being moved, the sounds he thought was... First he said he thought he heard yelling and sounds like kind of a drinking game, like each guy was encouraging the other guy to take shots. Then they all left. Then the sound of furniture being moved. I think the sound of furniture being moved was somebody being rifling through the room looking for the money. He also heard speaking, but he couldn't discern what it was. Maybe it was, where is it? Where's the money? Where is it? I think they were rifling through everything. He said he heard the vanity, doors opening and closing, the closet doors, the drawers. I think somebody was going there looking for the money. And I think George either woke up to fight them or was fighting all along. And I think that, to me, it sounds likely that they might have killed George in the room. I don't know how. Either he hit his head or they stabbed him, or I don't know. I think he was dead in the room. Therefore, the blood in the room while they were searching. I don't think they ever found the money, although I don't know. And I think that to cover up the corpse in the room and possibly contamination with blood evidence, I think then they tossed him overboard. And I think the silence preceding the thump, that's why another reason that I think if George went overboard, I think, as drunk as he might have been, as semi-passed out, I think he would have woken up from that and screamed as he was going 7 stories down to the water. I think he was dead in the room. I think they dumped him overboard to conceal it, which apparently worked. And I think that's what happened. We'll never know. And like I said, Greg Rosenberg's dead. So one of them is gone now. Cases like this baffle me. Give me your thoughts, folks. You know me. My name's Ron. If you like the channel, please subscribe. If you do subscribe, please hit the little bell icon next to the subscription button. And then you'll be notified when I post. And please give me likes. I work hard at it. I make pennies. Literally pennies. I haven't even collected them yet because so far it's only pennies. Anyway, guys, that's it for tonight. Bear with my nasal voice. And I will see you at the next location. Thanks. Bye-bye.